early. It is early Monday morning. It's the 19th of August, and this is a long chapter by Joan Marshall Grant. It is out of the book Many Lifetimes, which is a collaboration between her then husband Dennis Kelsey and Joan Grant. Many Lifetimes referring to reincarnation, and I've already read the first part of chapter 3, entitled The Supraphysical Body by Joan Grant, and I continue here where I left off, where she talked about a husband who got a hearing aid instead of resorting to the instead of making himself deaf. He should have caused his wife to stop bullying him, or else left her. She was a therapist as well as Dennis. A frequent cause of damage to the supraphysical body is a concept held by another component of the personality. For instance, if the body, guided by its innate wisdom, finds another body repellent, yet is forced to endure intimate contact because its instincts have been overruled by the false ethics held by the rest of the personality, trouble will inevitably ensue. This may appear as mental or as physical disease, neither of which is likely to be relieved until the individual has changed his concept of duty. Duty, which is so often the excuse for doing something we know to be wrong, causes an appalling number of people to endure intercourse as a drab routine, simply because they are labelled wife and husband. They are thereby inadvertently committing adultery, for the original meaning of this term was sex without joy, an illuminating fact told to me by one of the few real priests I have met in this century, who was also a renowned biblical scholar. He died shortly before he was to have been ordained as a bishop of the Church of England, and used to thunder from the pulpit, 99% of adultery takes place in the marriage bed. If a celibate prays with sufficient fervour for the gift of continence, he may render his supraphysical impotent, unless he realized his error before he died, or during his excarnate period asked to be relieved of his disability. It is probable that a later body will suffer from this malfunction. Unfortunately, people who have prayed for something which they later realize to be the last thing they really wanted often find that false pride prevents them from asking to be cured. However well-intentioned and efficient a healer may be, and whatever the level of consciousness on when she is operating, cure cannot take place without the cooperation of the patient. Eventually, even the most stubborn will become sufficiently distressed to ask for help, even though this may entail having frankly to admit that only blind obedience to dogma or terror of taboo caused them to waste a great deal of time and energy on their knees. Many apparently irrational fears have their origin in some painful episode experienced by an earlier supraphysical, which the current body is determined not to repeat. A trivial instance of this mechanism caused me to be unable to learn to dive. In spite of a passionate determination to overcome the disability, which forced me to walk furtively down the steps of a swimming pool, while other young women poised elegantly on the diving board, I invariably jerked my head back before I touched the water. I did innumerable belly flaps before I finally had to accept that I did not know how to stop my body resonating to an earlier one who had accidentally broken his neck on a submerged rock. A few years ago I tried to cure my terror of snakes by getting Charles to watch a slow worm so that I could accustom myself to handling it. Having organized this experiment, I was confident that I could carry it through, especially as I knew the reptile was entirely harmless. I was not conscious of any anxiety. In fact, I was mildly embarrassed that I had decided to practice on a slow worm instead of starting with a proper snake. I can recall the incident so vividly that I can almost see my hand as it stretches out to pick up the little slow worm, curled so confidently on Charles' palm. Then my hand stopped in mid-air, the fingers spread out as though pressing against a pane of glass. I spent nearly an hour trying to touch that slow worm, feeling more and more foolish and becoming increasingly angry with myself. But I could not force my hand within 6 inches of it. My intellect knew that it was in no danger, but my body, resonating to experience stored in earlier supraphysicals, knew that agonizing pain resulted from snakebite. I'm sure that the fear of snakes is so commonplace only because the majority of us had distressing encounters with their widespread species during our long history. But as I then believed that bringing any type of unpleasant memory into normal waking consciousness would diffuse its latent energy, I embarked on the recall of 3 snakebite episodes, 2 of which had resulted in premature death. Had these episodes resulted in fragment of the personality becoming split off, the recall would almost certainly have had a therapeutic effect. However, as they had long since been integrated, bringing them into my field of awareness temporarily made matters worse, and I gained nothing from this effort except yet another example of the occupational risks of far memory. Experience stored in many supraphysicals not only warns the current body against repeating an action which has proved disastrous, but also tries to protect it from suffering through demands made upon it by the intellect. For instance, if my body is becoming stiff because I have been crouching too long over a typewriter, it would, if given half a chance, instinctively stand up and stretch. But too often my intellect, engrossed in trying to express an idea, refuses to take notice of my body's sensible suggestion, which has been politely put forward as a whisper of mild discomfort. If this request continues to be ignored, the body will announce its need more vehemently as pain. This is why it is important to be aware of one's body, instead of studiously ignoring its advice, a subject which is discussed in greater detail in the chapter on the cultivation of instinct. The recognition that pain is primarily a warning and an appeal for help, being transmitted by the supraphysical body to other components of the personality, can have practical application in various forms of pain-reducing techniques. One of these techniques I began to use in my early 20s, although at the time I had not worked out the rationale of the process and was acting only instinctively. An acquaintance told me that she was to undergo major abdominal surgery for the removal of a massive growth which was thought to be malignant. She wanted me to be with her before she went to the operating theatre, and when she came round from the anesthetic, because she felt that I could be trusted to tell her whether she had a chance of making a good recovery, or whether she should relinquish her body as smoothly as possible. She was afraid of going under anesthetics, which she took badly, and had previously suffered prolonged vomiting, which caused her wound to burst after this. Oh dear, I had not realized it was had stopped, and it's always complicated when it stops because the voice stops. So, an acquaintance once told me that she was to undergo major abdominal surgery for the removal of a massive growth which was thought to be a malignant. She wanted me to be with her before she went to the operating theatre and when she came round from the anesthetic, because she felt that I could be trusted to tell her whether she had a chance of making a good recovery or whether she should relinquish her body as smoothly as possible. She was afraid of going under anesthetics, which she took badly, and had previously suffered prolonged vomiting, which caused her wound to burst after a simple appendectomy. I was with her when the nurse gave her Avatin, and she drifted into unconsciousness as though into a natural sleep, a perfectly normal occurrence. The operation took over 2 hours, and the outcome was far better than any of us had expected. For the growth was a fibroid weighing nearly 4 pounds, but free from any trace of malignancy. When she was brought back to her private ward in which I was waiting, she was, of course, still deeply unconscious, and the nurse urged me to go out to lunch, as the patient would not come round for 3 or 4 hours. I was about to do so when I had a hunch that I should stay with her, and that no one else should be in the room. Before I could achieve this privacy, I had to get both the surgeon and the physician to tell the matron that I did so with their full approval. Acting again on hunch rather than by logic, I drew a chair to the bedside so that I could sit comfortably relaxed with my hand on her forehead. Then I proceeded to tell her, speaking slowly and clearly, exactly what had been done to her body. The surgeon had been kind enough to tell me the procedure he had followed in considerable detail. I knew that she was oblivious to the sound of my voice, but the words acted as a carrier wave, which made it easier to impress her supraphysical with the information I was striving to convey. Having emphasized that she need no longer have any fear of cancer, I described the muscle layers which had been divided and the various other tissues which had been cut and then sutured during the course of the operation, so that she knew exactly where to direct the energy which would accelerate their healing. I explained that the warning sent to her consciousness in the form of pain had been acted upon, and therefore the pain was no longer useful. I then told her that instead of seeing the anesthetic as an enemy which had driven her out of her body, she would accept it as the benign agent which had prevented her from feeling the pain of surgery. Therefore, instead of trying to get rid of its residues by vomiting, she would use them as an anodyne, which would cause her to prolong her anesthesia into a state of natural sleep. Every few minutes I repeated the performance, which further experience with other post-operative patients had proved to be unnecessary unless the patient is particularly unreceptive. For a period of 4 hours she hardly stirred in itself, an excellent sign, for before the development of modern improvements in anesthesia, an unconscious patient often thrashes about, thereby putting a strain on the stitches, and sometimes had to be restrained from falling out of bed. She awoke only long enough to say drowsily, "It was so silly of me to imagine it might be cancer. I don't in the least want to throw up, so I go back to sleep." She slept peacefully all through the night, and even on the first post-operative day suffered such minor discomfort that this was easily controlled with aspirin instead of morphia. Her wound healed so rapidly that she was convalescing in my London house within a week. So I've stopped this here not to endanger a battery flat. Have a good Monday, and I'll read the next bit ASAP.